Welcome. Thank you for coming to VIFF and this TV forum sponsored so kindly by IATSE Local 891. Yay.
Yay!
Go Unions. I have the great pleasure to introduce as the guests of the Vancouver International Film Festival, Jane Espenson and Amy Berg. Who will tell you a little bit about their credits because I can't remember all of those shows. There's just too many.
Hi, everybody. I'm Jane Espenson. I started in comedy, where I worked on shows like Dinosaurs and Ellen. And then I went to Sci-Fi, where you may have heard of Buffy and Battlestar Galactica and Game of Thrones and Once Upon a Time and Dollhouse and Caprica and True Calling and The OC and Gilmore Girls, some stuff that wasn't sci-fi. Husbands, I've gone back to comedy because I've got an online comedy called Husbands that I created with Brad Bell, and I'm also a consulting producer on Once Upon a Time.
And Amy Berg.
Hi, I'm Amy Berg. I also have a long list of credits. I started in comedy as well, writing for Nickelodeon back in the day for a few years. Kids comedy, and then I immediately went to a nighttime soap called North Shore, and then followed that up by a hardcore science fiction show called Threshold, and then have gone back and forth ever since then from crime shows to genre shows. Which I'm probably best known for, the 4400, Leverage, Eureka, and most recently, Person of Interest.
Thank you very much. And yes, and because I didn't introduce myself at the beginning because I'm an idiot.
What do you do, Simon?
My name is Simon Barry. I'm a local writer, and I'm also an executive producer, creator of the show Continuum, and that's my only credit. So I'm much more efficient than these two. Okay, so since we're talking about sci-fi, and sci-fi is one of those genres that really is builds on what comes before it. I just thought for fun I'd ask you both, what sci-fi show would you have liked to have worked on and why?
I got my start through Star Trek Next Generation. You used to be able to just send in a script and they'd read it, and that's how I got invited in to come sort of start pitching at that show and start my career. So I got to go with original Star Trek, before my time, but oh my God, what an important, groundbreaking, idea-driven show that created indelible characters and has influenced everything from storytelling and the way we think about the Prime Directive, you know, all that stuff, as well as tech. Like, do you think that flip phones would have looked like they did and iPads would look like they do without the fact that we'd seen them in science fiction? Like, and I couldn't imagine anything better than writing a scene for Spock and Kirk.
That's a very thoughtful answer. Naturally, my first instinct was Game of Thrones. So I'm a big believer in equality, and I believe on that show there's a lack of equality in the male to female genitalia ratio. And I think I could go a long way to improving that for all womankind, really. But I think for me, like, you saying original Star Trek made me think of the original Mission Impossible. I think for me that would have been it's not a sci-fi show, but it did have sci-fi elements in that, like, you know, he literally changed faces, Martin Landau. But it was, for me, it was like watching that show in reruns, because I'm not that old, just so you know, put that on the record. I fell in love with it. I fell in love with the storytelling. I fell in love with the fact that they became different people literally every week, and I think that's actually what started my love of genre, was that they weren't limited by anything. Even though they were technically a crime show, they were very much science fiction in their themes and what they try to do every week.
That's a great segue into my next question, which is what is it that you guys believe sci-fi as a genre does that other genres can't do?
For me, I think it's thematic stuff. I think in a weird way, the farther away you go from humanity, the more you're able to actually reflect on it, if that makes sense. because you're building these worlds that are so different from your own, and you can comment on humanity via allegory, via metaphor, in a way that when you do it with basic, regular, boring television, it feels ham-fisted. It feels like, you know, you're hammering people over the head with the theme of what you're trying to bring to the table. But in science fiction, it feels, I mean, allegory is always a better way of selling, you know, what you have to say about humanity better than any other form, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. There's how do you add on to that? That's exactly right. You're putting a metaphorical lens through which to look at our world. And a way you could tell war stories on Battlestar Galactica in a way that allowed the audience to go, oh, okay, I get this side's the good guys, that's us, and those are the bad guys. And then halfway through the story, make them realize, oh, wait, no, actually, I think maybe we're the bad guys. And because it's not, you're not telling the literal story, you're using the metaphor that science fiction gives you, it allows you to be much more honest about our world.
And I think with religious themes too, it's I mean, that's been huge on all of the shows that we've worked on. The 4400 had huge religious themes. Battlestar Galactica had religious themes. Yeah. In a way where you're not actually talking about religion at all, which is what's great about it. You can, you know, you're using metaphors. You're using on the last season of the 4400, we did a whole storyline that was about it was a show about people with special abilities, and in the last season we sort of put it in a bottle to where anybody could take this drug and it could give you special abilities. And then it became about, if you could choose to be different, would you actually do that? Would you choose to be a small segment of society, for you be normal or be abnormal? And it sort of like, it just put a twist on you know, like, you know, people who are different and they're wanting to fit in. And on our show, it was about people who fit in, who didn't want to, who felt like it wasn't where they belonged, and they wanted to be special. It provided a way of telling stories that were, I think, were really fun and deeper than we could have gone on a normal show.
And I've been lucky enough to write on a couple shows where there are polytheists involved. Not a group that's got a huge representation right now. So you really feel very free to say anything you want about religion and what it asks of people, what it brings out of people, everything. You can say it very clearly when you talk about the polytheists without stepping on toes. And I think that's that again, it's that lens that gives you clarity.
It's interesting because with all of those opportunities, do you feel, and this is kind of a two-layered question, is the fact that you're writing for Sci-Fi or even developing for Sci-Fi, does it change the process of development? And this sort of also leads into you guys maybe discussing how your development process works in relation to non-Sci-Fi and Sci-Fi.
I wonder if this would be a time to show my clip, because I've got a clip that's from a show I work on now that's not Sci-Fi, that sort of shows behind the. I'll show you a behind-the-scenes episode of my online show Husbands that I developed with Brad Bell, and you'll sort of see that it's exactly the same process. I think not Sci-Fi, non-Sci-Fi. You're still pointing the cameras at people and figuring out what story you want to tell. So I don't know, do we have it all set to go? And you will see me and Brad Bell, and you'll see Jeff Greenstein, who's our director. I see flickering lights. It's all very promising. Yeah, this is it.
What are you doing in here?
Prepping for the straightening.
What is it in Hunger Games when they call everybody up?
The reaping.
The reaping. So give that, though, for the straightening, the idea of like it's the reaping.
What are you doing in here?
Prepping for the straightening.
Oftentimes one of us will take the first pass through, then the other one goes through and rewrites, and it bounces back and forth. Every now and then, there'll be a big chunk where one writer writes it and the other writer doesn't touch it. In season 1, The Long Run, about, you could Now I'm texting it, now I'm tweeting it, that was you and I never touched it.
Select. Married. Done.
Thanks, babe. I really do think you.
Hang on, I'm updating my status. Home with hubby. Smiley face.
Oh, that's sweet.
Hang on, I'm tweeting. Hashtag KIS my HUB.
I get it.
I'm emailing it.
Okay, babe.
Tagging.
Cheeks.
Stumbling.
Will you?
And dig.
And in this season, it was the putting in my retainer scene that Cheeks wrote, and I don't think I touched a word of it.
The scene that we shot today was a la Liz Estrada, Cheeks withholding sex in an attempt to get what he wants.
It's making a point that gays aren't allowed to be sexy, but they're being sexy. Thanks for the reminder. Keeps my teeth nice and straight acting. So they're making the point that they can't be sexy by being really sexy. And it's funny. It's double entendre. It's classic.
It's so clear what the two points of view are.
Maybe there's something else we can do before we go to sleep.
I think you really enjoy watching Cheeks with a plan.
What is this?
Me.
Less gay. The least gay.
Our gaffer, Justin, said to me at the end of the day, he was like, man, that scene was so funny. And Justin is a very dude's dude. He's like, you know, kind of a surfer dude kind of guy. And he said, you know, that was really funny. And I said, did it like weird you out at all? Like we're in our underwear and we're like about to get it on. And it's kind of like you had to be, you know, really paying attention to that all day. How was that for you? And he was like, that didn't even occur to me. What occurred to me was how many times I've been in that situation with a girl, man. That is so what girls do. I've spent so much time in this bedroom that I feel like it's my bedroom and it's weird.
So you can sort of see it's the writing the script, sending it back and forth, the talking with the director, pointing a camera at it. And so I feel like we all go through our lives and sometimes we're in a situation that feels like a comedy, and sometimes we're in a situation that feels like a drama, but we're always the same person. So I think there's so much emphasis on how do you write for comedy different than sci-fi? How do you produce comedy different than sci-fi? It's all just people, and it's all just pointing cameras at them.
I think the one difference for me going back and forth between, I mean, I work exclusively in 1 hours now, but breaking story is the area where it's so incredibly different for me, because when you're working on a crime show or any sort of you know, regular show, as I like to say, you're breaking a story inside of a box. Like, you know what that show is. Like working on Person of Interest, there's a box that you're writing into. You know what your setup's going to be. You know, like at some point the machine's going to spit out a number, and that number is going to identify a person, and that person is either going to be the victim or the perpetrator of a crime. So you're writing to that. Whereas in a science fiction show, you can start from anywhere, and it's so much more difficult. I mean, in the story break room on Eureka, it was a pain in the butt a lot of the time, because literally the only limitation was our imaginations and our budget. And we had a wizard with our budget, our line producer, and so that never became a problem, which was more annoying because it allowed us to do even more stuff. So the fact that we didn't have a box that we were writing into was actually difficult, because we were allowed to do anything that we could think of. Which is not something that you get on any regular crime show or perhaps a comedy. Yeah, I would say, yeah, comedy tends to fall more in the structured container side of that equation than not most comedies. Oh, there's an inciting incident, and then there's a complicated, things got worse, and someone had a plan, but the plan made it worse, and then there's sort of a revelation at the end. Oh, is that what we were really fighting about? Like there is often a container into which you pour your liquid. I think it's a very rare show that doesn't have some sort of formula. Yeah. Even in sci-fi, you will find shows where you can go, oh, this is the shape of their storytelling. Yeah. On Eureka, you know, there's a sheriff of a town and something's going to go wrong. That's basically our limitation. Something's going to go horribly, horribly wrong, and the entire fate of the universe might be at stake. But you want to be guided by theme. So on Buffy, the question was, why are we telling this story? What's the Buffy of it? What's she going to learn, and what's the audience going to take away? So that gave it a structure. Right. But you're right, the less structure, the harder it gets. And the way we solved that on Eureka was that each season we gave it a close-ended arc. And we discovered that later on. I came onto the show for the last 3 seasons, seasons 4.5, which is our actual real different season, and season 5. And what we did to sort of help ourselves in the room, because the show sort of fell off the wagon a little bit in season 3, and it felt like it was becoming a box show. It felt like they were writing to the same thing every week, and there was frustration on the network and studio side that, like, why aren't we opening this up to a broader, range of stories? And so we realized, if you can actually tell any story, it's almost impossible to tell one that makes sense from week to week and have it still make sense in the serialized version of it. But if you have a closed-ended arc for a season, it actually works out really well. And so season 4, we had them go back in time, and things changed. And then by the end of that season, we sort of resolved the things that had changed. And then season 5, we put them on a ship. We put them on a ship to Titan, and the entire season leading up to it was, for season 4.5, was that there was this mission. This mission was out there. And so every week there was some story that had to do with the mission and building the spacecraft and all of this stuff. And then we realized that we're not Battlestar Galactica. So in season 5, we had to do something a little different. So we put everybody on this spaceship, but we couldn't actually send them to space, because that's not what Eureka is. Eureka is an Earth-based show. And it's the town is literally the name of the show. So how can you send them into space? So what we did was something a little different, and that's the clip.
I was going to say, name the ship Eureka.
Yeah. The ship is called Estrellas, but that's if my clip is ready from the DVD, I can show you that, because that explains what we had to do to keep Eureka, even though we had this giant sort of big arc in play.
Yeah. Another clip.
Maybe. If we have a projectionist. Oh.
Yay.
Oh, okay.
Anything?
Oh, this isn't it. See, I should have been here.
How about you?
Yeah, that's not it.
Does the system hold a dozen times?
Yeah, that's not it.
There is no evidence.
This
of
it's
sabotage. Well, we'll find it. We'll
this is
just
the
keep
middle.
looking. Where? I mean, it's been a month and still no leads. It's like they vanished without a trace, Jack. Everything has a trace. Yeah.
Sorry, guys.
Wrong clip, apparently.
It kind of gave you the answer to the question I was trying to pose with what the other.
We went forward in time.
Yeah.
It looked like that was the top of Act 1, and you wanted the teaser?
I wanted the second half of the teaser, and that was the top of Act 1. Yes. As you can tell.
Because it had credit.
It has
To
credit.
That's how you know it's wrong.
The wonderful Bear McCreary was credited on that. Battlestar music, anyway.
Yeah, and he this was his closest that he got to doing a Battlestar score for our series, because mostly, our composer, we share a composer from Battlestar Galactica and Eureka, and the shows are so dynamically different.
Yeah.
Ours is considered, in many respects, a dramedy. And I don't think that's a description that you could apply to Battlestar Galactica.
I made it as funny as I could.
I know. But so for him, scoring it was a little different.
Just for clarity, you want it at 350 or
At 350.
that's where he had come from?
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Oh, that's not what my DVD player said. You can start at the end, at the beginning, and then we can just show the whatever.
Thank you.
So while we're waiting here,
Yes, that's another question.
while we're waiting, you guys were just talking about sort of the process of sci-fi worlds and building themes and things. Do you think it's better to start with the world or the stories and build the world around the stories?
Wait, I wonder if I gave them the wrong episode. Is that possible?
I don't know.
It should be the first episode on the DVD. Sorry. It was a really great question. Whatever the first episode on the DVD is, 350. I've done that.
Start with the world or start with the story?
Which one? Which do you think is the better place to start?
It should be start with the characters, but in fact, I'd probably say story. I mean, the wonderful thing about science fiction is it is idea-driven in a way that I think no other genre really is. But you got to have the characters right away. I would definitely start with that. And the world is embroidery. The world can be used to, bring out your theme and give the characters this backdrop to play against. But if your story can't be told just with human beings interacting in a room, you may not have a story there. It really has to come back to characters in identifiable emotional conflicts. And I think if you start with the world, you're probably going to end up feeling like, why isn't this coming together? Why isn't it compelling? And it's the humans making a decision under pressure that's going to make it compelling.
Yeah. Good television is about about storytelling, and it's not about the world or the hook.
On Eureka.
You wouldn't want to miss
This'll work.
It's a historic moment for Eureka. I think that we should work that together. I need to figure out what I want.
Let me think about that. Walk a pad. Safe travels, Jill. Launch sequence initiated. Someone else is controlling this launch. Where'd they go?
Hey, folks. Welcome back.
A lot of changes since Eureka. This Jenna.
Very nice to meet you.
You've known her for 4 years, Allie. And with Joe. Call me back.
Joe and Jim is like Bill, and I can't take that from her.
Really sorry, Allie. She's crying.
Because everything she's experiencing feels absolutely real to her. She's emotionally invested in the reality she's just helped create. They all are. The greatest minds in Eureka are working for us now, and they don't even know it. The Estrays and her crew have been gone for a month. Soon, Eureka will have to accept that loss. And meanwhile, the greatest scientists of our time are wired into an artificial world that we control. They have no idea that what they're experiencing isn't real, but what they design in that construct is very real.
That's called exposition.
In the last month, they've made strides in biotech, engineering, and weaponry. We're about to give them a problem with genetics.
All of these scientific discoveries belong to us.
That's very impressive, but how long can you sustain this?
Indefinitely. The photonic plasma processor makes trillions of real-time adjustments in order to keep the world feeling authentic.
So authentic that a severe virtual trauma could trigger a fatal neurogenic shock.
These are smart people, Dr. Barlow. What if they start to question their world, or the non-player characters who are there with them?
That's when we chose to put them in a future reality. It's impossible to recreate your...
That's the worst possible clip I could have shown.
It was
That's actually from
awesome.
the episode 2. What I wanted to show you was episode 1, which was basically what the recap was, which was our cool sort of Battlestar Galactica ship coming down sequence, but we did it in a very Eureka way. And it was it's sort of Fargo planting the flag on what he thinks is the Moon Titan, but it's actually Earth, and it's sort of like it was the humor, it was a dramedy way of us doing a space drama, but it was sort of my way of explaining how even though you can do anything, you can do anything, that you still have to write to your show. You can't aspire to be something that your show is not, because the audience is very smart and they will know, and it will not feel like the show that they've come to know and love. So we couldn't do Battlestar Galactica. We couldn't actually, there is no scene, even though there's an entire season of us building a spaceship to send to Titan, there is no scene of them actually in space, because that's not our show. Our show is about the people who build it.
But I thought that was an excellent script for showing how exposition doesn't feel exposition-y when you care, when you're invested, when it's done elegantly and briefly, and I thought that was some very skillful exposition.
Oh, thanks.
Very diplomatic.
That was, I wasn't intending to show, I was going to show you guys some eye candy, but you got the exposition instead, which is a different kind of lesson, but still a lesson.
Well, these stories are great because they do illustrate sort of there's a pro and a con to the sci-fi genre in terms of storytelling, in terms of production as well. You can write yourself into a box. You can be over zealous about certain things or overambitious and find yourselves in a problem you have to write yourselves out of. Maybe you guys could share a couple of anecdotes about, you know, the pros and the cons of sci-fi as an approach in terms of as writers, and how that has affected your, you know, your experience since then, how you've solved problems before they come up.
Pros and cons of sci-fi. Well, I think you hit on a lot of a big one, which is if you don't have the structured storytelling, you've got too much freedom, and you've got to sort of give yourself some rules, or you end up. Rules make writing better, and that's why sometimes when you get a note from a network or a studio, even if it's a dumb note, the script gets better because it forces you to be creative to figure out how to implement this note and still make it good. Oftentimes, you actually end up with the big leap forward. So when you guys, any of you are aspiring writers and are getting notes from your friends, don't just throw it out because you're like, well, I think what I have works. Really think about it. Take it seriously, because it may be that in figuring out what bumped your reader, you can actually not just fix that, but elevate the whole thing. Pros and cons of sci-fi. Everybody wants to weigh in. When you have something, when you have a procedural where it's built like a Rubik's Cube and you're heading toward who the murderer is, I think people understand that if they pull on a thread, the whole thing could unravel. Whereas in sci-fi, it may be just as intricately constructed, but the person giving the note may not realize how crucial that one little thing just make this little adjustment, and they don't really realize how it's all Rubik'd together, and it's going to all fall apart. Production, like it just trying able to do something in space can be very, very expensive, but what the weird thing is, it's never the thing you think is going to be expensive is the thing that ends up being expensive. You can be like, okay, I think I fixed it. I wrote out all the space scenes. And they're like, yeah, it's actually this one in the grocery store where you show them scanning and a little hologram of the item comes. Yeah, no, we can't do that. Yes. Like it's never the thing you think it's going to be expensive.
My story from that lesson is on the 4400. I had written the scene that was the show is about essentially a Homeland Security department that whose job is to sort of supervise the people with special abilities to make sure when things run amok, they corral them back into place. And I had written a scene inside a surveillance van because it's the Homeland Security department, and they would have this tech, and we've seen this tech before on the show, just not in a van. But apparently, taking the tech from one set and putting it in a van environment was very much impossible. And so instead of a surveillance van, I literally got a balcony and a pair of binoculars that were shared between two people. And so that, I mean, like and that's a lesson for any kind of show that you're doing. Like it's budgetary, and you're right, it's never the thing you think it's going to be. And like that whole green screen where, people have to freeze in time. No, we can totally do that. I'll just hire some mimes. It'll be awesome. They did. It was great. But you can't do a surveillance van, apparently. So it's never what you think.
Yeah.
You want to follow up? No. Well, along those lines, the one thing about sci-fi that there's an expectation for visual effects in sci-fi, especially in TV. Because now it's become pervasive, it's become less cost prohibitive. Of course, that creates problems of its own. Can you guys just talk about the pitfalls of leaning on visual effects, the pitfalls of trying to pull off maybe too much with visual effects, or sometimes not even enough, of not delivering what the audience expects from a visual effects point of view, and just some of your experiences with that?
I can't speak from experience, but I can speak from viewership of a show that was on last year called Terra Nova. That was actually, when you think about it, a well-done character piece with too high of expectations, because every week the audience, who every single person had seen Jurassic Park, they want to see dinosaurs, and they want to see dinosaurs every week, and they want at least one act or two acts full of dinosaurs, and you just can't do that on any kind of budget. I don't care if Steven Spielberg is producing it himself, and they couldn't provide anything that matched the audience expectation, and that's why that show failed. There was some really good character work, I thought, being done on that show that no one paid attention to, because they were looking for the big splashy eye candy, and that was very rare. And I think a lot of that has to do with film too, and all these big budget science fiction movies have created this expectation that you can recreate that on a weekly basis. But we're making 24 movies every season, and we have to spread that money over all of those episodes, and we just can't give you exactly what you want. And so we have to find a way of sort of satiating your desire for eye candy at the same time that we don't lose track of the storytelling inside of it.
I think there's something interesting. I've got a couple things to say. One is that there was a pilot a year or so ago called Virtuality that didn't end up becoming a show, but it was brilliant. And it was written by one of the Battlestar guys, Michael Taylor. And there was more green screen in there than you even could tell watching it, because they used green screen for scenes like the obstetrician's office. And you really, more and more, this is actually becoming practical. You just set out a couple tables like this, a couple chairs, and a plant, and in the middle of a great big soundstage, you don't have to have the carpenters build the walls. You just have the characters come in and sit, and you just slap up some fake green screen walls in the edit bay, and suddenly, boom, you've got this office that you built like that for free. And now those walls are like they're in the computer and can be put up anytime and can be used for the architect's office or whatever. And like more and more we could be seeing that, where you're seeing tons of visual effects and you're not even aware of it. And I think that's sort of an interesting new frontier we're heading into. Also, I wanted to talk about on Battlestar, when you'd see the Cylons that were computers, were robots, not the flesh and blood Cylons. Those were only visual effects. We didn't have a single physical model of one of those Cylons. So you couldn't have a character, say, reach out and touch one. I wrote a scene where one blew up and Baltar was going to be like impaled by a part of the blown up Cylon. There are no Cylon body parts. They don't exist. We'd have to manufacture one and figure out from our modeling of the fake Cylon what the part would look like. It was a huge deal. On Caprica, where the robot was such a big, important part of it, I insisted that we get an actual physical robot. So they made this sort of wax model of it that we ended up using a whole lot, because suddenly we had a cheap way to shoot the robot without it having to be visual effects every time. So it's just another example of sometimes you don't know what you're seeing when you're a viewer, and when you see it, sometimes what you're seeing is either more or less high tech than you think. There's a lot of magic applied in different places.
As writers, though, do you guys have a rule about when you're approaching a script in terms of visual effects? Do you think about, I need a little sizzle here, less steak, and I need to plug that in? Or do you just let it be driven by whatever the episode is? Is there a consciousness that you're selling a product that needs to deliver a bit of that every time?
There is for me, for sure. And I think that comes with experience and time. In the business, where you're thinking production-wise, you're thinking of like quotas that you need to fill in the audience's mind, and in this there are scenes too when you're writing them and you're like, oh, this isn't going as well as I thought. Maybe I need to throw in a little robot flying past their head, or like just something to give a little more oomph to the scene. Something comes crashing down. It's literally, it's like kids' TV sometimes, just to keep it interesting. But more often than not, you're writing with your budget and your the effects that you want in mind. Because when you're breaking the story, you're thinking of tent poles. You're giving the writer to go off and write. Here's that visual that best represents what we're trying to tell in the scene. Usually that's not something that a writer is struggling with on a page. That's something that we would give them to go off and write.
I think first draft, I'm writing as a viewer, like, what would I want to see? Second draft, I'm writing like a producer. What can I afford?
That's what I was going to say, is the temptation to have a get-out-of-jail-free card only when you're with the writer hat, and then the producer hat comes on, and it's just not going to happen. Yeah. I'd like just to, because you guys have worked on so many pop culture shows that are in the zeitgeist right now, if you guys could just talk a little bit about where sci-fi is in culture right now with movies and TV, what its job is, what its role is in drama, and specifically in television, because it's an ebb and flow of sci-fi shows, as you know. Sometimes they're hot, sometimes they're not, and just if you could discuss just the why is that an important genre?
Sci-fi has always been huge in movies, and you look every year, what's the big movie? Avengers, no surprise. It's Joss Whedon, so it's awesome. And it's sci-fi, which is just like always does huge at the movies. But for years and years, decades, the sci-fi on TV has been seen as like, really? Sci-fi? What? Like big robot monsters and ray guns? It's like, have TV people who make TV never seen movies and understand that these are actually extremely popular and not cheesy and not down market 1950s tin can robots and it just in the last few years, and I think Game of Thrones has helped a lot, is that the word genre has ceased being a dirty word. Science fiction isn't the dirty, shameful corner of television anymore, which is about damn time, because if you look at just forget even like the big movies like the Avengers. Favorite movies of all time. Well, Wizard of Oz, what does she do? She flies to an alternate world, and the big comedies, Splash. She's a mermaid that's just like a monster, but with a tail and a good heart. like genre is everywhere, and TV is finally realizing it and embracing it and giving it its due. And the fact that Once Upon a Time, total genre show. Nobody says that. Everybody says big mainstream hit, ABC, in the tradition of Disney, and people are like, it's totally genre.
Yeah, and there's always a fear in television to actually call it genre or to label it sci-fi, because somehow that's going to isolate viewership. When in fact in movies it's a calling card, and it's so weird to me. And I think a lot of it has to do with people when they go see a movie, they're expecting spectacle, and that's not what we can deliver in television. What we can deliver is soul, and I think executives, the people that make the decisions on whether to put forward sci-fi shows or not, they're thinking in terms of an audience member going to see a spectacle, and they want to know how you can deliver the spectacle. And we're much more interested as writers on how we're going to deliver the soul. Like what about it is saying something about humanity. And what is our way into the story?
Which, by the way, makes us better than them. Soul is better than spectacle.
Yeah, it's true. I think there's still a disconnect in TV, where sci-fi is still a little bit of a dirty word. But thankfully, there's shows like Once Upon a Time that are sort of like borderline shows that are clearly fantasy, but at the same time can deliver an ABC audience. And they don't call it sci-fi. That's true. They don't call it fantasy either.
Clearly, in the technical definition of sci-fi, they shouldn't call it sci-fi. But I like to say sci-fi when I mean sci-fi fantasy, because I want to jolt people who think they don't like sci-fi into realizing how many non-science or how many non-grounded elements are in a show that they like. And TV increasingly can deliver a spectacle. There's a shot in Once Upon a Time that kills me every time, where Emma's catching her breath. Oh my God, there's supposed to be some scary thing down here, and we see that the wall she's been standing behind is the massive body of a dragon, and the dragon's eye opens over here, and he's this scary dragon eye, and it's like, that's as good as anything you'd see on the movie screen. It's massive and exciting, and then you see later on it bursts into flames, and it's so good.
They wouldn't do that in the movie, though. In the movie, it would come from afar, so you can see the entire body first.
It's not as good. That eye blinking open is the best thing.
That's right.
Why do you think it is, and you worked on Battlestar, why a show that won a Peabody, maybe 2 Peabodys, why is it that sci-fi isn't getting the critical love that shows that are, pushing boundaries in other ways on cable, like Breaking Bad and Mad Men? These sci-fi shows are just as groundbreaking, just as challenging, just as tackling tough issues, but critically, no one seems to be paying attention. Do you have any insight into why that is, maybe?
I think people are afraid of looking silly. And I think somehow they've still got it associated in their head that it's like, well, it's not real, it's silly, it's sci-fi, it's for kids. And all I can hope is that Game of Thrones, which never felt silly to anybody, will change that perception.
I mean, yeah, we got that all the time on Eureka. Eureka was a silly show, and they thought kids watched it, but really the middle-aged women was our #1 audience for that show, and that's the viewership that you kind of want, and Sci-Fi Channel never had before. But yeah, no, I don't really have anything else to say about that.
Do you guys have anything else you want to cover before we open up for questions?
I'd love to hear what people are thinking.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's open up for questions. And I think if you don't think your question is heard to everyone, I'll repeat it back to the room so that you guys know.
Yeah, there's a floating microphone.
Oh, there's a flying microphone too. Okay, well, we'll let the microphone hander outer decide who gets the first pick then. Yeah. Go.
Someone has a microphone up there. Is that right? Yeah.
Go ahead.
Hello. I have a question for Jane. So you wrote for the first episode of Game of Thrones. How hard was it trying to keep, knowing that it already had a fan base?
Right.
Like, were you scared that if it wasn't close to the book, people would start just running after you and sending you hate mails and things like that?
Yeah, I wrote for the first season, not the first episode. And I mean, there were really good, strong showrunners there. And what they did actually was I had my little thumb-eared copy of the book because I'd read the book. And I came in to be told what I was going to be writing. And they said, your episode will go from page 172 to page 203, whatever it was. And so I knew it was very clear they were sticking close to the book. So that wasn't a decision I had to make until I got down to the scenes, when, of course, I had a certain amount of latitude of, do I keep this exact piece of dialogue, or do I, generally what I was doing was trimming it down. People talk in a lot longer sentences in a novel than they do on TV. So a lot of my time was spent sort of paring down scenes, paring down, removing words from speeches, removing syllables from words, and just sort of getting it as tight as possible. But I definitely knew that the showrunners and I both wanted to preserve what George R.R. Martin had done so brilliantly. There was no way we weren't going to tell a better story. We weren't going to tell a different story. We were going to tell that story. So I didn't think about the fans. I think if you think about yourself, you are thinking about the fans. If you trust that you have good taste as a writer, you can just write what you would want to see and trust that that's what the fans will want to be, if you know that your heart is still a fan's heart. Yeah. Oh yeah, we can give her Amy's mic. No, it needs to be in the microphone. Because they're recording it. So you need to be recorded.
As far as like when you're creating this world that you're putting your characters into, I find like for my own work, I get really overwhelmed with how much exactly you have to come up with. Is there any kind of organizational structure that you follow just to keep track of everything?
Well, what we did on Caprica, because we were creating these 12 different worlds, and we actually brought in an outside person. So Bob Harris was someone that I sort of commissioned to come in and write us a little travel guide, write us like what's the history, geography, politics, of all those 12 colonies. And we could have gotten lost in that for months and months and months. And so it was just a certain amount of going like, okay, we got what we need. We had an outside source do it, so we were able to think about story, and then we can go from there. Because you're right, you can wander forever in those delightful forests. And I think
that's my problem right now.
Yeah, I'd say cut it off. Like, yeah, and start thinking story, and you'll be able to do more world building as you write. When you realize, wait, I need him. It sure be great if I knew what kind of joke someone from Vergon would make to put down someone from Erelon. You'll find that in the moment. You don't have to have all of that done in advance. It's not like you're going to be handing this over to a writing staff to do it. You're going to get to make all those decisions as you go. So you've probably done enough.
And if you're starting with characters, then that should answer the question. I mean, starting with the world is problematic because then you have to pare it down. And like you said, you start with a forest when really the heart of it is a tree, a single tree. So if you start with a tree, that will inform, that's a way long forest metaphor. But but you want to start with the core, which is who's the person that we're caring about and what's interesting to occupy his world. And so you have to focus on the character's world and not the whole world. Otherwise, you're going to get overwhelmed very quickly. That's really loud.
This is kind of along the same lines then. So when you're making worlds, if you were to focus on like 3 aspects of them, what are the most important parts of those worlds?
Depends on your story, I would say. Like, can you get a little more specifically what
like,
you're working on?
If I'm doing like a fantasy one right now, and she's kind of coming into it, so in order to explain it from that character view, would you focus on like politics, religion, geography?
Well, it depends what your story is. If this is a story about this girl approaching this world and she is recruited to become a nun in that world, the religion is going to dominate. But if she is trying to make her way across the fields to find her lost father who is exiled to this land, geography is going to be a lot more important. I think that's a case where you're going to have to let the central thing you've thought of for this character is what she wants and what's keeping her from getting it.
Yeah.
So what the arena of what she wants and the arena of the things that are blocking her will determine which of those worlds are the ones to focus on.
Yeah, what's the most interesting obstacle for this character that you've created? I think that from that you can build around it.
Yeah, it's a good example of your let the tree dictate the surrounding foliage metaphor.
Yes.
Hi. Am I good? Okay. Amy, you were earlier talking about, possibly writing for Game of Thrones, and Jane, yourself, you worked on, you worked on a fairly revolutionary show for the role of the female heroine with Buffy. I was just wondering if, and including yourself, Simon, if you could talk about the role of women and how they're presented in modern sci-fi, not just serial and episodic, but also feature films as well.
Sci-fi women rock. I mean, is there a character, Buffy, Starbuck, President Rosalind, have there been more wonderful female heroines than have shown up in sci-fi recently? And
Sure, name characters in your shows. Whatever.
And Daenerys. And Snow White's good. She's kicking ass. Yeah, I think that sci-fi, I mean, it's infinite diversity and infinite combinations. And we're starting to get gay characters in sci-fi too, which has been a long time in coming. So sci-fi, I think it's built for diversity, but you have to be eternally vigilant. Yeah.
Well, I think that has a lot to do with the people that are creating the shows and the entertainment in the genre. A lot of those people maybe grew up thinking differently than a lot of people. And maybe we're a little more open-minded, and so the worlds that they're creating allow for more people to occupy it, more different kinds of people to occupy it. And there's the Bechdel test, right?
Love Bechdel test. If you guys don't know about this, it will change your life.
Yeah.
I see very smart people are nodding over there.
Yeah.
Tell them what the Bechdel test is.
The Bechdel test is basically for all forms of entertainment. It's sort of a law of women in either a book or comic book or movie or TV show where if all 2 women do in a scene is talk about a man, then you fail the test, basically. So
Yeah, do you have a scene where there's just 2 women talking, no men in the room, and are they just talking about a dude?
Yeah, yeah.
And if you pass, you've got 2 women talking, not about a guy. And it is remarkable how very, very few things pass that test. It's shocking. Start watching your pop culture or any culture with an eye toward that and see how rarely it comes up.
And what, I mean, on a show like Eureka, what was so refreshing is that I got to write for Allison and Joe, who are, I think, 2 of the strongest women, but completely different kinds of women. One being a scientist and one being a literal ass kicker. But who they bonded over story, and they didn't bond over they bond over problem solving. They bond over intelligence. They bonded over their different approaches to life. And it had never. I think there was maybe one scene in the final season where they were actually talking about a guy, and I had a problem with it in the writers' room. I was like, wait a minute, no, what that one scene, that entire season, I can't do it. But no, I think science fiction more than any other genre allows for strong, independent thinking, intelligent women, and hopefully that will trickle down to the other genres.
One of the fun things, really things that I adored about the Battlestar Galactica universe was that they came from a world where there hadn't been a tradition of discrimination based on gender or orientation. So nobody ever told Rosalind she wasn't qualified to be president because she was a woman. They said she wasn't qualified because she wasn't qualified. And it's totally different. And I actually I've heard some people complain about like the incompetent queenness in Game of Thrones. And it's like, no, because she's incompetent in ways that don't have to do with her being a woman, that just have to be incompetent in the same way a man would be incompetent in that job. I think that one of the things you have to own up to when you start having a lot of strong female characters is that they can't all be paragons. I love how damaged Starbuck is. Buffy couldn't let her friends in. Part of what makes them human. If we're all out there as paragons and angels, then we've really made no progress. So it's a complicated issue, but actually on Once Upon a Time, women dominate our call sheet. We got the Queen, we got Emma, we got Snow White. It is actually extraordinarily rare on our show to have two guys in a scene talking not about a girl. We have reverse Bechdel issues.
I have this problem where the male lead on my show is the traditional female part in every other show. So my struggle is that we write everything for Kira in a way that we would write for a male character if the male character was lead. There's no differentiation. What it presents though is problems for the male characters, because in that second banana position, literally and figuratively, there is that you can't do the same things with a male character that we've become accustomed to and become used to with female characters in that role. So I actually find it when we're in the room, we are constantly struggling with how to play the Carlos character in a way that doesn't come off. And it's funny because that conversation may not have happened if we'd flipped them. It would have just been an assumption that the girl partner is asking the questions, going along with things that probably shouldn't. And so because it's a guy, we're kind of confronted with this this expectation every episode, and we actually have a hard time dealing with it.
New writers at Buffy would often come in and spend a little time pitching, and then what if Xander jumped in this time and rescued her? Because that'll be different, and he never gets to do that. And you go, okay, no, there's a reason we don't do that. Buffy is our hero, and it's just good, well-intentioned writers we've just been cultured this way. And one of you working on husbands, I've really had to think about that, because Cheeks has a line in season 1 about I have an exotic femininity, and that makes you think of me as less than. And it's like, okay, this is a whole nother issue. What do you do with the feminine male? Is he less than the masculine male? Why does femininity carry this? Why does that feel like an insult? And you could sort of see it in there of like the Lysistrata scene of like, well, that's sort of a traditional female thing to do. Does that make him weak? What does it say? Like, we have to deal with these issues in a whole new way. There's a whole new level of complexity that gets into it when you start getting into orientation. That's just, it's wonderful in a way. I mean, it's society sad, but it's wonderful in a way as a writer that you get to delve in and deal with issues of equality, expectation, masculinity, femininity, strength, and weakness in a whole new way. Delightful in that there are many, many episodes to write.
Could all three of you just maybe briefly break down on how you break down your scripts before you actually start writing about?
Sure. Actually, you were invited to participate. Do you want to? Yeah.
Sorry, how to break down the scripts?
Yeah, breaking story.
Oh,
and then start writing the scripts.
Well, I think it's very unique for every show. As they were saying before, I think it was Amy or Jane was saying, you build a box. I think you said there's a box that the show inhabits, and you tend to know exactly what kind of stories you can fit in that box, and the show will define that for you. So that dominates the beginning of the process, because everything that gets thrown out as an idea when you're brainstorming either fits in it or doesn't. And you know pretty quickly if it does or doesn't, based on what the show is. But you're always trying to push, I think, the limits of that box. You're always trying to find new ways of expressing the stories that fit in that box in a way that kind of expands the box a little bit all the time. Personally, we just put as many nerds in one room as possible, and we throw out ideas as quickly as possible, and we start to shape the conversation. And by the way, this most of the terrible ideas start a conversation that 2 hours later result in a really great idea. So we're, in our room especially, we're pretty open-minded about any crazy notion, because the notion, even though it may be completely inappropriate for the show, it starts a discussion that does lead us to finding something that we all identify as something that fits in the box. And when that happens, then we start to kind of break it down and tear it apart.
On a serialized show, you basically, you figure out what your end point is, and you build to that, and every episode has a very specific end point that you want to get to story-wise, so you don't go too far and don't leave yourself anything for the next episode, or don't go too, you give too little, and you don't have enough meat in the story. We did that a lot on Eureka. We kind of always knew where, we sort of went down and talked specifically character by character what each character just went through and where they're headed, and then by the end of that episode, where we want them to land. What is their journey of the episode, and what's the plot device, basically, that can help inform those journeys the best? And that's where we got a lot of our plots on Eureka, since, I mean, if you started from plot on a show like that, you could be spinning your wheels in the room for weeks without a hard story.
And you want to keep, what does every character want? Where are they starting? Where are they ending? What's the theme for the episode? And it might be something as ridiculously cliche as true love conquers all. Like, totally be your theme. Your theme could be our parents' expectations provide more of our destiny than we realize. It could be anything like that, but you figure out what your theme is, and then work on a whiteboard or work with your cork board or whatever you've got. Split it into the number of acts you have. Once Upon a Time is a 6-act show. So we have a whiteboard divided into 6 columns, and you sort of figure out, okay, Act 1 is going to, Act 1 is sort of inciting incident, ends in the first twist. Oh my God, Regina overheard all that.
No.
She must have a plan. And then the end of Act 2 is like, what, whatever, I don't know what the end of Act 2 is, but something else happens.
Well, that thing you thought was going on is
right. That's not what is actually going on. Exactly. And it's tempting at a certain point to go, okay, I sort of get the kinds of scenes that'll go in this act. I'll go start writing. No, don't. You want to know what every scene is in every act, what the act breaks are, who's in each scene, what information comes out, what makes that scene interesting. Do you need that scene, or is it just fun and it's been hanging out there since you started, so you feel like you need it? Really check, do you need it? Have that all plotted out before you start doing any writing. And that's the hardest thing for a writer who doesn't have a room to go live in to do, because you're going to fall in love with a scene and feel like, well, it's all in my head, I just should jot it down so I can capture it. And now you're locked into a thing, and what if it doesn't fit? You've got to just keep it there up on the board until it's all done, and then you can go write.
And the difference between writing television and writing movies are technically 3 acts, but you can never really tell where the acts end. In television, not only are you building to the end of the episode, you're building to the end of each act. Each act needs to have its own complete story. And that you essentially resolve to some extent by the end of that act, and then twist it up for the next act, and then twist it up for the next act after that. So, man, we do hard stuff.
That is the hardest stuff.
Yeah.
I hate breaking story. I'm not great at it. I've spent 20 years doing this. I still sit in the room going, like, what do we do? Should we twist it? Is this, how does that, how do we do this? I love scene work. I love making the scenes sing. But the nice thing is you can have a 20-year successful career in TV and never master all the parts of it.
If you're Shane Espenson. Not everybody writes scenes as well as you do, my friend.
But that helps.
Yeah. I mean, and the struggle is like, this character is going to go through a traumatic event, and there's like, there's a near-death experience. Is that? Do you think that's Act 3 out or Act 4 out?
Who knows?
And yeah. But the problem is, you have to go back you have to break an episode multiple times often, because things aren't laying out the way you thought it was going to lay out in your head when you started the break.
That brings up a really important point, because there's a nonlinear aspect to story breaking for a season that really can have an effect on the first part. And you'll think, well, we've broken the first half of the season, we know where we're going. By the time you've done the second half, you've actually changed direction in a way that's even better than you imagined. So now you have to go back and relook at your first half and say, is this actually setting up what we've now gone to?
Except you've already shot it.
No. I mean, if you get to break it before you start writing.
You get to break it before you start writing?
Yes.
See, that's not fair.
We only do 13.
Yeah, that's the thing. That's why, you know why cable shows win all the Emmys? Because they do 13 and they can do what you're talking about. They can go back and adjust the early stuff. We're writing one of those serialized novel where everybody's already read chapter 1 by the time we're writing chapter 13. That's one of the things that was so great about Game of Thrones was because it was based on the book. You knew the story worked. You knew you weren't going to be changing the story in some massive way that would change the earlier thing. That's a huge problem with the way TV works right now. And network TV, where you're writing 22
American
episodes,
television, yeah.
and you have to try to figure out. Try not to say anything in the first half that's going to be affected by a big change in the second half. So if you get that luxury, that's amazing and wonderful. And I'm not really angry. I'm just seething with jealousy.
I'm actually angry. That's not fair at all. No, I mean a lot of times in network television in our country, it's you're shooting an episode and you're only 2 episodes ahead in the story break, and the production machine is eating up these scripts, and there's no way if you find something in episode 8. But you're already shooting episode 6, and there's no way to set it up except for in the previous episode, which is why everything feels stunted on occasion, where it feels like, oh man, I really wish that could have played out over more episodes, but we're just finding out that she's married, and then now all of a sudden she has a baby. I mean, like, you know, it's crazy how it works.
Yet Once Upon a Time does an amazing job of laying in little clues that we know we can pay off in a couple different ways down the road, and we're also very disciplined that we do pay them off, but it sometimes makes it look like we knew exactly where we were going, when in fact we knew we were going somewhere. We didn't always know exactly where, but these showrunners are extremely skilled at making sure that none of those stitches drop away, that we're always aware of what's still hanging out there and that it needs to be paid off. And so our shows, I think Once Upon a Time looks like we did it that way, where we had it all written and then shot it. And I worked on Torchwood, where we actually did get to do that, where we had it all written and then shot it, and it makes a big difference because you can go lay in those little golden threads that connect back from earlier episodes. So nice when you get to do that.
Yes, it is. Any next question?
Hi, I was just wondering your opinion on screenwriters having a voice, and kind of like Max Landis recently did a talk at Dubai Comic-Con where he talked about being the voice behind Chronicle, and kind of shedding light on how shitty the American screenwriting system is. And what is your opinion, and how do you feel being...
Well, I'll speak to the Canadian system. In television, and I think this is the same in the States, the writer is the producer to a degree. So you only have yourself to blame if it's shitty.
Especially if you get to write the scripts in advance. I'm still mad. But I mean, the screenwriting process in America is you're right, shitty. I mean, everything is overdeveloped. Things get rewritten 5 times over.
Features.
Yeah, features. Yeah. And things are just essentially go through this machine, and this machine is crushing it little piece by piece every time it goes. It goes into turnaround, and they do another rewrite, and the core of it always gets lost by the time it comes out the other end, unless you have an auteur type of situation like with Joss Whedon in Avengers, where he's able to tell a story that he wants to tell and write it the way he wants to write it without input from other writers picking at things. And in television, the writer is boss. That's, I think, why we like it so much, is because it really is on you, story-wise. Obviously, we take notes from lots of different people, but in the end, it's our words on the page. It's not other people on the outside coming in and influencing. And so television is a very, very powerful medium for a creative person.
TV's better. Yeah. And there's another thing you could mean by the writer having a voice. It's not just the writer having a voice in the making of the show, but I also am a big believer in the writer having a distinctive voice on the page. So if any of you have been told by your screenwriting instructors, don't write anything in the stage directions that cannot be seen, bullshit. That is nonsense. The viewer of a show has all these musical cues and the angle that the shot starts in and stuff that tell them how they're supposed to feel. On the written page, we don't have that. All we have is our voice. You can use your voice in the stage directions to have a voice in the making of your show. Don't direct it on the page, but you can certainly suggest how it's shot, evoke a mood, use whimsical language to convey the tone that you're looking for. There's an example I always cite. Michelangelo wrote an episode of Battlestar Galactica which included the stage direction. Zarek has a look on his face like a man trying to pass a starfish. And it's like, it makes you laugh. It lets you know this is sort of a humorous moment. It paints a picture. It tells the actor what to do. There is nothing wrong with having, and it makes you go, I want to meet this Michelangelo. He seems like a smart, confident writer. When you start doing that, your scripts come across as really confident. So don't just have a voice in the making of your show, but have a voice on the page as well.
Who has the mic?
Question about structure in sort of the big picture. A lot of genre shows are very serialized. Actually, they started serializing probably before a lot of the mainstream shows. What are the techniques besides the very effective technique of closing the season? Like Buffy closed every year, big bad, big finale. Eureka did that. But other shows like X-Files and Lost, they just seem to build on it, build on it, build on it. There was no closure every season. And by season 6 or whatever, it was just out of control. How do you rein that in on serialized shows? I mean, besides that device of closing the season every year.
No, you go. I know. I was saying you have the microphone, so you talk.
Oh, thanks. I think it's writing it all down. A lot of people try to keep stuff in their heads, and when it's in your head, there's no structure. And you tend to forget what you've been building to, and then something new comes in, and it overrides the things you were thinking. I mean, I like to put everything on a board. I like to see it. I like it to be written down on paper. And then when you change it, you know what it's affecting because you can see all of the things that it's affecting. And so you wanna put up your endpoints. I mean, shows like the X-Files and perhaps Lost can fit into that category as well, where they don't necessarily know season to season what they're building towards. I actually don't want to create a show like that because I like writing to something. Because it gives your characters something to do, something to think about in a way that matters. Because otherwise they're just running around an island and you're not really sure where they're going, and they're not sure where they're going, and the audience can tell that. But for me, I like to write everything down. I like to make sure it's on paper somewhere in a notebook or whatever. Here's what I'm building to the end of season 1, season 2. Just to make sure it's down, and it can always change, but you want to make sure you hit touchstones.
Yeah, I think the thing you told us, besides the mini arc solution, what other solutions? Well, I think the mini arc solution's kind of the right one. In Buffy, we would sit down and go, okay, what's the season going to be? Well, it's going to end with Buffy hurling herself off and sacrificing herself so that Michelle Trachtenberg doesn't have to. And okay, that's a thing to do. Or this season's going to end with the mayor turning into a giant snake at the high school graduation. You have a thing to write for. It means you're not constructing some massive 7-season arc. If you've got Game of Thrones where you do have a great big huge arc, boy, it sure is great if you have source material to rely on, because otherwise, in order to make that work and not go crazy, you're essentially going to have to write that novel in your head. You're going to have to come up with a 7-season story that doesn't go nuts on you and you know where you're going, and that's a whole lot of work.
Next question.
Hello. Oh, sorry. Well, you said that sci-fi usually has no limit, but there's always some cliches that come up, and a lot of them, like, I don't know, the main character, kind of Blade Runner style, finding out that he's a robot, or a clone, an alien, that he came from the future. Or like alien races all looking the same, having no, all having the same culture, stuff like that. How will you guys try to avoid all this type of cliches or
I was trying to whisper her an answer. I don't know why I did that. I think instead of cliche, what you're talking about is archetypes, and archetypes I think are great. I think it's great to start from, especially in science fiction, that could be anything, like we were saying. If you have a robot, well, there's a gazillion different types of robots, just like there's a gazillion different types of people. What is this? Is this robot an android built to look like a human being? How does he feel about that? Does he have feelings? Who are his makers? What does his makers think about him? Is he a service robot, or is he designed to do something else? I mean, there's so many different. I'm gonna write that. There's so many different ways to go within each archetype, but at least the archetype gives you something that people can recognize and relate to. Because a lot of times in science fiction, if it's so far out there, there's nothing to sort of pull it back to who we are. And you need to connect with something as a fan, as an audience member, to the material. And that's what archetypes allow you to do.
You would have thought vampires would be done after all these centuries, and after Buffy sort of definitively put the cap on vampires. Now we got Vampire Diaries and Twilight, and like there's all new kinds of vampires. So these things are ultimately refreshable. But if you have any sense, if you feel like as you're writing, like this feels cliche, just keep finding the twist on it and going like, okay, I'm going to make a whole new monster. It's not a zombie. It's not a vampire. See if you can find something that is, that has evocative qualities. Think about all the different kinds of superheroes that have been written. They keep coming up with new superpowers, new exciting ways that a person can be different. The important thing is probably still, if you're going on the model of this superpower makes me very powerful, but it also makes me an outcast, that's kind of the important part. And it's really cliche, but it's really saying something very identifiable about real life. I mean, you could tell Glee season 1 and make Kurt an android, and it would be awesome.
I think
also it'd be quite new.
The trope, sometimes aiming that direction is the safe thing to do because that's what other sci-fi has done. But the problem may not be the trope. The problem may be the journey you're taking to get to the trope. And I think that you can, like we've been saying earlier, it's your character's story that really defines the movie at the end of the day, or the show. It's not the twist or the gimmick that you threw in there. The gimmick will be memorable if it's good, but you can't be hanging a movie on it. It just won't work.
Here's 2 things to read. One is Cormac McCarthy's The Road, and the other is Never Let Me Go by Kazuo Ishiguro, who wrote Remains of the Day. And they both deal with technically things that you've seen a million times in a way, things that could be considered science fiction tropes. And they're so fresh, so new, you won't even think about the fact that you're reading anything familiar. It will feel like the freshest plum plucked off the tree this morning. And it's a great example of how to take something that someone might consider tired and make it feel dewy and fresh.
Since we're pitching books, Red Shirts by John Scalzi is another very specific example of it is what you think it's about, but then it's not at all what you think it's about. And he does a really good job of sort of putting you on this journey. And you think you're like, I'm literally inside a trope right now. But he bursts that bubble, and it's really a great book. You guys should check it out if you're a huge Star Trek fan, especially.
I think we've got time for one more. Who's got the mic?
Oh, please.
Hi there. So you've been talking about, film and television sci-fi. I'm just wondering what you think of web series as sci-fi, and if that's a viable route for it to go, and if as a starting writer, it's a good thing to pursue if you'll go far and get picked up based on just the web series emerging right now.
I'm doing an online show. It doesn't happen to be sci-fi, although we're doing tie-in comic books that are sci-fi, based on husbands, where they go to different alternate universes and we see them as superheroes or whatever. But yes, I think that's a great place. I think it's a good mixture. You can't rely on expensive special effects, but I've seen some amazing sci-fi web series where they actually do some kind of shockingly good special effects. And I don't know about getting it picked up. I don't think you will really want to. I think the internet is a really good place to be a show right now because you can be international. And there's, you're reaching people all around the world, and there's a much bigger potential audience base online than even in TV. So I'd say go for it, absolutely.
And online, you're not having someone dictate to you what your audience is. The audience is what it is, and if it's good, people will find it. And it's not being marketed in any specific way, which is the problem with.
Except for the way you decide to market
Yeah,
it.
well, yeah, except the way you want to do it yourself. But I think there is opportunity for sci-fi web series, and I actually was having that conversation with Felicia Day not too long ago, talking about how you can do a web series that has the elements of fantasy and science fiction in a way that's affordable, but also in a way that allows you to tell the kinds of stories that you would want to tell on a bigger stage. And it's certainly not easy, but it's certainly doable. It's very doable.
And of course, sci-fi doesn't have to mean effects. A guy's dead girlfriend comes back and talks to him every night. Sci-fi, but no effect. So just think about what you can afford, and yeah, go for it.
It's all about the story you want to tell, and there's different ways to do it. You can do it inside a crime story, you can do it inside a comedy, or you can do it inside a science fiction world that you've created.
Anyway, I think we have to wrap it up. I'd just like to say thank you to Amy and Jane for being part of this.
Thanks, Simon.
And thanks again to Vancouver Film Festival and IATSE, and I'll pass it